Most toxic victims suffer from citizens' bind. In seeking publicity, they enhance their community's stigma. In actively seeking answers, they enhance their level of stress. In depending on government for assistance, they are likely to be disappointed. And facing a mitigatory gap wherein an extended period of time elapses between the definition of the exposure and the execution of steps to correct it, victims may find themselves trapped in a situation where they are damned no matter what they do. From Contaminated Communities by Dr. Michael Edelstein.
Nobody reporting.
This is right for MRL. We got a train derailment just west of Alberton.
Okay. Any injuries?
Yes, we need an ambulance to head straight out to Walter, take the Petty Creek exit there and go across the river.
Okay.
And then go across the tracks and hang a right.
Go across track, hang a right, and then what?
And then there should be a train down toward the west end. I think we got a chlorine spill. They're very poisonous gas. They're probably notify your officers out there.
Okay, let me get things going. Hold the line. Is this MRL?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know how many tanks or how many cars or?
No, it just happened there. We're just trying to get the crew out of there. There is a...
How many crew members are out there, do you know? Two crew members? And do you have radio contact with them now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and are they requesting medical assistance?
Yes, they are.
Okay. 4 clear at 422.
MRL is the nation's 14th largest railroad. According to the Bozeman Chronicle, Montana Rail Link was born of controversy on October 31st, 1987, when Burlington Northern sold its southern line through Montana. That night, a runaway train crossed the Bozeman Pass and derailed at a speed of 70 miles per hour. A 1995 Federal Railway Administration safety report states that from 1990 through June of 1995, derailments accounted for the largest category of MRL train accidents. A total of 101 derailments occurred in 5.5 years. In 1996, they had the second worst accident record for their class size of railroads. Dennis Washington, originally from Montana, is the owner of Washington Companies and its many subsidiaries, including Montana Rail Link. The following is the true story of the April 11th MRL derailment in Alberton, Montana, and its aftermath.
911 reporting.
Yes, this is really weird, but we live in Alberton, across the Natural Pier Bridge. And our house just started shaking.
Okay, yeah, there has been an incident in the area there.
Did the train derail because there's smoke everywhere?
Yes, and we do have people responding right now, okay?
derailment, I believe, in Alberton.
Okay, and where are you calling from?
7223067, briefing 158
We've
Plateau
got a
Road.
train derailment. Okay, so your wife already called you then, right?
Yeah, right.
Got a
But I
train
drove down
derailment
there,
west
and there's
of
like a
Alberton,
green mist on
west
the
of
ground,
Tribal Camp.
and my
Got a
lungs started
chlorine
freaking
cloud
out, and I
hanging. We
just
don't know
drove
how
away
much
real
it's
quick.
filling, but we've got a tanker that's
he blew the
filled.
train whistle at me.
Okay, yeah, I
had
would
that.
definitely stay out of the area, okay?
We're evacuating the house right now. I mean, you can start smelling it up here.
Not yet. Can you do that for me? Okay. Right up. Okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that then. And we've got people headed on the way right now. Hang on just a
Should I
second.
contact my neighbors?
Just a second, okay?
Sure.
Calling 911, go ahead.
An SCBA is a self-contained breathing apparatus for fire crews or emergency crews, and there are different lengths of time on air breathing in them, and ours is 30 minutes maximum, which you actually have 20 minutes because you got to allow yourself enough time to get out of a burning building. And they're not the greatest, nothing new. I mean, it's kind of like hand-me-downs. And we didn't have just a few tanks to replace them. And not all of the members were able to have any. And on our last tank, when we realized there's no way we can get out to replace the tanks because of the cloud, we took it upon ourselves to take our masks off and conserve what air we had. But whenever our breathing was getting bad, we'd just take the hit off of it. Just to try to keep us going, because we were actually thinking more of getting the people out at that point. Even the one that was hitting the siren here in town. We had to have a public siren. It was pretty loud. She stayed in there pushing on the button manually, just keeping it going.
We're lucky enough to be upwind of it because we have kind of prevailing winds in there, blowing from the west. And but the chlorine is heavy, so in the evenings the wind stops and the stuff runs down the river. So during when Robbie came back and he was telling me things, I wasn't too worried. I thought it was just purely chlorine, and I thought that it would probably dissipate pretty quickly because chlorine is a really reactive halogen. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't too worried in my glorious ignorance.
We had missed time, but we didn't know that we had been knocked out at that point. I found myself laying on the ground twice, and I didn't remember falling down or anything happening. I was standing, and the next thing I knew, I was awake and on the ground. And when I stood up, it took me down again. It was kind of like, whoa, you know. I walked in and got a cup of coffee and sat down and got real dizzy. My heart felt like it was going to come through my chest. It was going really, really fast. I was trying to rationalize at that time because I didn't know the spill had taken place. Our lips were tingling. We had a metal taste in our mouth. Our face was kind of numb. Well, we later discovered, after Ada had called the contractors later that morning at 9 o'clock when they didn't show up, that there had been a chemical spill. And we turned on CNN and we saw that, and it made some sense. There was Alberton right there on CNN, and we're going, holy shit, you know, that's just right over there. I called 911 and tried to explain to them that we had a metal taste in our mouth, that we were experiencing some oddities, and they told me we were in a safe zone to stay put and leave us alone, we're busy, and hung up.
I'm Beverly Ridenauer. I have a son who's 13 and my husband. We also had two family members, house guests staying with us when the spill happened. We were awakened at 5 a.m. Neighbor called, told us what happened, told us we didn't have to leave unless someone came to the door. So we didn't leave. No one came to the door, we never left. 9 a.m. I left for work, drove through the cloud, became ill on my way, so I stopped here at the Frenchtown School, and about collapsed when I got out of the car. Paramedic put me in the ambulance and told me it was total evacuation. They told me they would send crew in to get my husband and family members, everybody out. An hour and a half later, no one showed up for them. So they covered their faces, they said, got in the vehicles and left. They showed up at Frenchtown. My husband and one of our house guests needed oxygen. That's how severe the chemicals were that morning. You could smell the chlorine very strong. It was a huge fog. That's what it looked like, just I guess as if you were out on the river and the fog was rolling in that morning is what it looked like. I don't know how else to describe it. And the smell, of course, was just horrible. It was raining. So, of course, when the water hit the chlorine, that didn't help, and who knows what else was mixed with it. So we left. We went to a friend's house, had stopped and picked up some groceries and stuff like that, and we stayed at a friend's house most of that first morning, listening to the radio, trying to find out what we were supposed to be doing, if we were going home that night. We all assumed at that time that we were going to be going home that night. And all of a sudden they came on the radio and said that if you needed accommodations to call a certain number. So we called the number and found out, no, we weren't going home that night.
April 11th, 1996. Over 1,000 residents were evacuated from the Alberton area to Frenchtown High School and then later to Missoula area hotels. An incident command team was established, originally with Scott Waldron, Frenchtown Fire Chief, as head. 3 more members later joined this team.
And a Montana rail link train derailed and spilled 129,000 pounds of chlorine, 85 pounds of sodium chlorate, and 136,000 pounds of potassium cressolate, totaling 133 tons of chemicals.
They put us up in a hotel room, and we went to that hotel room and ended up staying there for 2 weeks, or just over 2 weeks anyway. During the time we were evacuated, it was very stressful. I tried to attend all the evacuation meetings because I thought sooner or later they're going to actually tell us what's going on, or give us some good information about what happened to us, what our futures may hold as far as being exposed to chemicals, and what's happening to our homes. That was our biggest fear and concern. Was we had no idea what we were exposed to exactly, the amounts. Was it safe for our house? We had a cat that we had left in there because we thought we were going to be right home. You know, was she still alive or was she dead? And we felt we never got those answers at all. We're still, to this day, talking about what does the future hold for our kids. My daughter every day talks about how she can't wait to be a mommy, and I'm afraid someday it's going to be a matter of having to tell her you might want to think twice about it.
The following is a quote taken from the incident command minutes made by Tian Nguyen of the EPA on April 13, 1996, and 2 days after the spill. You can't justify the highway being closed if you're working under these conditions. A blue plume of caustic fumes was witnessed from across the highway at 12:30 and unprotected people in the area. We observed people in street clothes. We have shut down the highway, but people are working this way at the site. Need to open the highway ASAP, getting pressure from the governor, Washington, D.C., and the public. In the 17 days after the evacuation, many people who were not involved in the initial evacuation, but who participated in the April 14th pet rescue or came to daily briefings with hundreds of evacuees in their still toxic clothes, became exposed and ill for the first time.
Within just a few days of the spill, local health officials made the decision to allow people back in to feed and water pets and livestock without having any information, any data on what chemical interactions had occurred between the chlorine and the potassium cressolate or any of the other chemicals there. There had only been chlorine monitoring done at that point in certain areas around the site. And the decision was made to allow people back in, and the people were not fully informed of potential risks and trusted the local health officials in that decision that everything was safe. So people returned into the evacuated zone secure and confident in the fact that it was safe to go because they had heard that from the incident command team and the local health officials, wearing no protective gear, not, to my knowledge, not even having been offered that as a choice, and not even having enough information to ask the right questions, which would have led them to make that choice. So in hindsight, it seems like a very, very misinformed and dangerous decision which had lasting implications for many people.
You were exposed more than I was too, though, because you came back to pick up the school animals on the pet feeding day on Saturday. We're around here all day on that bus, and I didn't come back in that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I have pets in my classroom, some fish and a rat and birds and stuff like that, and it was a couple days, and they needed feeding and whatnot, so they had the pet retrieval day, and I basically spent a good part of the day driving around. They stopped us at Bridge while they were waiting for instructions and monitoring. They had the chlorine tester in the bus, and I came down to the house and went back, and I really think they say there was no monitoring chlorine, but I really felt like I'd been affected, tingly, just not, it kind of knocked me for a loop there for a while right after that and during it. Tokers that live the house right up in here, they said when they went into their house and their shop, it was really strong chlorine smell in their garage, their outbuilding, and in the house, and they asked the guy that was monitoring the chlorine on the bus, well, come on in, could you come in and take a monitoring in our outbuilding here? It's really, really strong. And the guy didn't do it. He wouldn't get off the bus and do it. But I do think, and they say there was no detectable or minimal or whatever else when we were doing that, but I do, when I kind of trotted down the road because I didn't want him to make him wait, and then I walked back, and I just really...
He was really sick that night and the next day.
During the evacuation and attending the evacuation meetings, or whatever you want to call them, I felt, and my husband felt also, that we weren't really given the medical information that we were asking for. A lot of people had a lot of questions, not only short-term, long-term. I know a lot of doctors came in and said, if you had effects from the chlorine, you would be having them right now. They would be respiratory. But all the symptoms and the problems that we were experiencing had nothing to do with our respiratory. And I don't think they ever even tried to address any of the actual medical questions that people had. I think they kind of danced around them more and gave us more misinformation than actual good information.
They didn't follow their evacuation procedures, because there are procedures for all of these, and one of them was to take all their clothing, give them showers, and new clothes. They did not take the old clothing, so all the people came to these meetings, and the smell in those rooms were just awful. They really were terrible, and so, the rashes were going around just from being just with these people.
When we arrived at Frenchtown High School, we were told nothing. We basically all were grouping in, I think, what they call there a common area. There was no information given to us as far as remove your clothes, shower. Somebody did come in and say, gee, there are showers here if you'd like to shower, if anyone wants to, clean up a little bit, since it was early morning. But nobody said anything about removing your clothes, showering, washing your eyes.
Right after we got out of town, they checked us out in the ambulance. That was it. No decontamination. They really didn't push to go into ER, except for the ones that was really in the bad stuff. And when they took us to the emergency room, they never took our clothes. As far as our fire gear, we wore them in the emergency room, so everybody else in the emergency room was getting contaminated.
I've been dealing with pesticide exposures for many, many years. The EPA has a pretty darn good manual out there, and part of the first thing you ask for is the safety sheet. That is standard EPA protocol for an acute toxic event of whatever nature. It's federal guidelines and has been for 15 years. I actually didn't see the MSDSs until, I believe it was 9 or 10 months later, something like that, because there was such a mixed bag of chemicals on that train that it was hard to come up with those things. That is standard operating procedure for an acute toxic exposure.
Material Safety Data Sheets, MSDS, let people know the known dangers of different chemicals. The following are excerpts from the MSDS for the chemicals spilled in Alberton. For potassium cresylate, spent oil refinery waste. Inhalation may irritate the respiratory tract and mucous membranes, causing burns, constriction of the windpipe, severe pulmonary edema, pneumonitis, and death. Eye, corrosive to eyes. Severe damage may occur from contact with either the liquid or concentrated vapor. Skin may cause reddening, itching, inflammation, pain, blistering, and tissue damage. May cause allergic sensitization in some individuals. Potassium cresylate is highly soluble in water. It was raining the morning of the spill. And for chlorine. Acute health effects. Exposure causes irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat, including tearing, coughing, sputum, bloody nose, and chest pain. Contact can severely burn the eyes and skin, causing permanent damage. Chronic health effects. Chlorine has not been tested for its ability to cause cancer in animals or for its ability to adversely affect reproduction. Repeated or prolonged exposure may cause bronchitis to develop with cough or phlegm and/or shortness of breath.
And a lot of what people were being told was coming right from Montana Rail Link. The whole government, the state, the feds that were supposedly on the scene did not take control of the incident. Trying to find out for people independently of MRL what was going on at the scene, what was mixing, how far were the plumes going. The information that people were receiving for many weeks after the incident was very minimal, and in my personal opinion, very paltry as far as the severity of that catastrophe went. And at these meetings, this is what MRL was handing out to the kids. It's all about what not to do around the tracks. And this is totally absurd because, you had kids who were exposed to toxic chemicals, and MRL was the responsible party. And this is what they were giving kids, color books on what not to do along railroads.
When I have a breathing attack, it's like breathing through a clogged up straw, sort of. And more like trying to eat really thick jello through a clogged up straw. I have to use this, and I have to press this button, sprays in my mouth, and I have to put this one up my nose.
In 1998, Montana Rail Link gave a special tour and presentation to the Missoula Local Emergency Planning Committee. Bill Brodsky, then president, spoke of safety issues at MRL as follows. What is safety? Well, from our standpoint, a zero tolerance level is fine, and that's our objective, and we will always be working toward that goal. So, I think from our standpoint, as we move in that direction, like any industry, we're going to be looking at how we are doing relative to ourselves, performance in the past, the performance of our peer group, and other people in the industry. In 1996, the year of the Alberton spill, Montana Rail Link had the second worst accident record for its class size railroad.
Well, I remember one of the first meetings was all the people were saying that there was something out there they were reacting to, and Ellen Leahy with the health department and the Chris Weiss or something with the national EPA,
Weiss.
And all the other people were saying, no, we're showing no detect or non-detect, non-detect, non-detect. Everything is within the limits for safety. And this woman was getting up there, and she was really getting upset because she was really feeling it. And finally I raised my hand and I asked, and I said, this is very pointed, but I said, now you're putting this as if all your machines are showing no detect. All the people are saying they're being affected. And you're saying, all right, the machines are a better indication than the people who are breathing it.
The following quote from Ellen Leahy of the Missoula County Health Department came April 21st, 1996, 10 days after the spill and the day after Incident Command had made the decision to let people go home on the 27th. The decision was made to contain the odor and move some of the soil out, get the bulk out. The toxicologists feel these are true symptoms from the odor. Nausea, headache, all the clinicians and toxicologists said the symptoms are real. More notes from the April 21st, 1996 meetings. Terminology, hypersensitivity, not multiple chemical sensitivity. Delayed reaction to chlorine. Some have lowered threshold. Work zone has low levels of trichlorophenol detected. Can go in, should be advised. May be hypersensitivity. Talk to physician. The bulk of the cressolate should be removed.
When I got home that evening, I got a call from Jim Carlson of the Missoula City County Health Department, and he said, we've had a bad chlorine accident out at Alberton. Some of the people are complaining about a pesticide-like odor. He said, do you think that there's some possibility that the chlorine could react with something from another car to make pesticide-like odors that people would be reporting? He said there was another tanker that had been ruptured in the area that had potassium cressolate, and did I think there was a possibility for reaction? And I considered that for a moment, and I said, yes, it looks to me like there could be a reaction. The potassium cressolate is a sort of material that can react with chlorine. I said I wanted to check with a couple of my organic colleagues just to confirm my feelings, but that I would be right back to him. And when I talked to them, one of them said, well, unless the chlorine was directly injected, I don't see it reacting. And the other one said, oh, I think there would be reactions. And knowing the scenario of the spill, looks like the chlorine was directly injected. So both of them sort of confirmed my suspicions.
Workers cleaning the site will be wearing protective clothing, including dermal and respiratory protection. It is unlikely that a hazmat worker wearing protective clothing will encounter sufficient concentrations of chlorophenols to cause symptoms.
I haven't done extensive research on the accident. I mostly was just involved in that early analysis and helping decide on criteria for when it would be safe for people to go back. I helped develop a set of questions that had to be answered before they could go back in. So from what I was told and what I learned by looking at MSDS sheets is that the potassium cressolate had been used to help remove some sulfur from other fuels so that other fuels would have passed through the tank car. From my analysis, I can see in the tank car significant amounts of phenol, which is related to but much different from cresol, and it was in a concentration almost as high. I wasn't really out there during the cleanup, so I don't know firsthand how many of my recommendations were followed. One of the things that I recommended to the people managing the site, and I don't know whether this was followed out or not, was that the types of compounds that were formed with the chlorine and cressolate reacting are potentially soluble in water and persistent in the environment. So I recommended that they cover the sludge trough with plastic to keep any rain from percolating through there and carrying the material into the groundwater. I know later on I looked at the remediation of the site, and they had excavated the soil quite deeply in that area, although I saw reports after that saying they did find traces of some compounds even in the area below where they'd done the excavation.
At least one Alberton resident whose property borders the spill site is now complaining of a cresol taste in her water. The Montana Department of Environmental Quality is currently analyzing her water due to persistent complaints. November 1998.
I did find one example of a cross product that had the
positions chlorinated at, 3 and 4, and that gives the potential for dimerization between two of those components to give a dioxin that would have the bad geometry. So there was one particular product that I saw that had a potential to dimerize into a 2,3,7,8 substitution pattern, which on a dioxin is the one you want to avoid.
Dioxins are a family of chemicals with related properties and toxicity. There are 75 different forms of dioxins, the deadliest of which is 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzo P-dioxin. TCDD is the most toxic chemical on Earth. In the 1980s, scientists used coarse sediment samples from lake bottoms to time date dioxin contamination. The results led the EPA to conclude that dioxin was virtually absent until around 1940, when levels began to increase steadily before leveling off around 1960. This increase parallels the growth of chlorine-using industries. Dioxin accumulates in fat tissue and causes health problems at minute exposure levels. U.S. EPA reported that Americans' level of dioxin are at or near the levels known to cause harm. Health problems include endometriosis, immune system suppression, disruption of hormone activity, and decreased sperm counts. Any further increase in dioxin will certainly be harmful.
I did think it would be appropriate to test the cressolite tanker to see if there were any dioxins.
No dioxin testing was ever done for the largest known mixed chemical spill in railroad history. No blood serum samples were collected and tested for dioxins or chlorinated and unchlorinated phenols, nor were fat biopsy samples taken. No air monitoring for anything but chlorine has ever been released to the public. April 21st, 1996. I will stake my career on it that this soil poses no health threat to Alberton. Steve Way, EPA.
This whole thing with what the agencies are coming out with now, that the hazardous waste was contained, and that even if it was there and there were these high parts of trichlorophenols and phenols, that it didn't affect people, it just doesn't wash. Because you have the pet rescuers who went in the first few days afterwards, who thought they were going into a chlorine spill there again, and that the chlorine levels were safe, and they were being monitored, and if there was any problem, they would be immediately evacuated. And it was completely inaccurate. And the agencies should have known that. There were already complaints of pesticide smells. And why they let people go in before they monitored for organic compounds, I don't know. It makes no sense to me when they knew that there was an entire tank load of them out there on the ground. They were not protecting people's health. They had a responsibility. And then they will tell you, well, people really wanted to go in, and we were being pushed. And I know that. I saw that. Nobody wants to be out of their home. But if there had been full disclosure, if the public had understood that there were trichlorophenols, 500 and 600, 700 parts per million, phenols at 20,000 parts per million in the tank car, and 7,000 parts per million on the ground, I think the public, if they had realized the safety issues, would have not pushed so hard. They would have understood that they were out for good reason. The pushing came because what we were told was that it was safe in Alberton, but we were only evacuated in case of this chance of chlorine re-entering while they were unloading those tank cars. And that's why people wanted to go home, because they thought that they could be there and leave if need be. And there again, the disclosure was not accurate. If people had known the truth and had been informed, I don't think they would have gone on the pet rescues like they did. I don't think that they would have wanted to go in. And I know for sure that a lot of people would not have ever made re-entry.
There was an awful lot of manipulation take place. I watched the railroad manipulate Alberton people to go back. I stood up and asked them to do an area photography of the area so we could see the impact. What do? They went downtown Main Street with a video camera and videos everybody's house and the town cat, and this is what your town looks like without you. Don't you want to go home? And when they said that people could go home if they wanted to, everybody took that as though it was okay, and 800 people hot-footed at home, in my opinion, to a poisoned environment, which is probably still poisoned today.
On April 27th, evacuees were allowed to return to their homes. At this point, the EPA and Missoula County stepped down from their positions. The state of emergency was lifted, and the Montana State Department of Environmental Quality and Mineral County Health Department, with its one staff member, were left in charge.
As far as, the way people are kind of divided here in town, the reason I believe, just kind of sitting back and watching and talking to people off and on and just listening, the reason that they're kind of divided is this was originally a railroad town. And the majority, all time members, I guess, they're going to defend the railroad. They have possibly pensions to the railroad, I don't know. It hasn't really gotten real bad as far as that, but in a manner of speaking, it's busted friends up. People just don't communicate real well anymore. Everybody's trying, and even the ones that still have a problem with it, they keep quiet to keep it down, and just kind of continue on with life.
In 1993, the closest year to the spill with available statistics, the entire population of Mineral County was 3,315 people. Alberton's population at this time was 354 people. 85% of the county land was federally owned. The average income in the county was $11,752 per year, with the average value of an owner-occupied house at $35,400 and a median rent of $194 per month.
And when the train came down the tracks with the not supposed to be hot soil, this was supposed to be the soil that was very readily able to be transported out of the area without hurting anybody, it was like somebody punched me in the face. And my son was in the living room, and I could hear him screaming and when I got in the house, he was holding his hands over his ears. I'll never forget this. Holding his hands over his ear like this, and the kid was screaming. And he's like, my ears, my eyes, and he couldn't breathe. He went into an asthma attack right away. And we left, of course. But I looked at the train. I can see the train from here, and the cars were supposed to be covered. The cars were not covered tight, tarp down. The cars had a tarp over them and some miscellaneous stuff on top to hold the tarp. But the tarp edges were billowing in the wind. So we're talking G-force, soil blowing out all over the ground. And I'd already cleaned my house. I'd already washed everything from soup to nuts in this house. I'd cleaned carpets and everything. And of course we had to evacuate again. And we went back to the hotel, and when I came back the next time to clean the house, Justin couldn't even come down the hill all the way. And within an hour of leaving the Missoula area, his peak flow went up. I mean, a measurable amount. It seems to me it was like 50 to 60 points on the peak flow meter. His breathing capacity increased. And he couldn't come in the house, so I ended up having to rip out all the carpeting. Of course, RailLink wasn't going to send somebody out here to expose them to whatever they contaminated my house with. I had to pull the carpeting out, and by the time I got done, I was sick.
Plum Creek Lumber Company relocated logging crews on May 9, 1996, after they complained that the smells emanating from the derailment site were affecting loggers in the area. Montana Department of Environmental Quality, Tom Ellerhoff, wrote, "The DEQ supports Plum Creek's decision and believes temporary relocation would be in the best interest for all concerned. Dated May 9, 1996, less than 13 days after the spill victims were allowed home. In October 1996, months after the spill, Jack Hunt of the Missoula Electric Co-op complained to the Montana DEQ of meter readers having headaches after reading meters in Alberton. Why were corporations given a level of Montana DEQ response that individual citizens were not?
Creek about sort of the same issue.
This was the work crew?
Right,
yeah.
Relocating logging crews while cleanup occurs at the Alberton derailment site.
And when I was somewhere in the Great Stack, is some correspondence regarding that, and when the crews indicated that they were having headaches, we said, our recommendation is get out of there. And I believe that they then conferred with a responsible party, and I think they came to some sort of arrangement, and I'm not exactly sure. Are you folks going to interview RailLink too?
MRL's Incident Command member Dan Watts declined an interview.
When it was, I mean, I'm just reading from your letter. You said the DEQ supports Plum Creek's decision and believes the temporary relocation would be in the best interest for all concerned. I'm just wondering about the people who live right there. Was a temporary relocation thought to be advisable for them as well? And what was
probably it would have been based on how they felt, but I don't recall ever. Those people may have left long ago. I simply don't know.
If someone tells me safe, it'll be all right. Experiencing more symptoms, won't be sick. It's all normal.
Did Trask feel safe going back into Alberton after the spill?
No, lots of people didn't either. Came back, if you messed around in the weeds, you would get sick, rashes. We would get those even without going back. So, if you got them here, how could it be better there?
We had a lot of flu-like illness, rashes on our skin, burning sensations, ice pick pain that just comes out of nowhere, twitching muscles, our eye muscles would twitch, our face, would twitch, just anxiety attacks, breathing problems, respiratory infections. We would catch a cold at the slightest thing.
I need to interrupt.
Our animals have been terribly sick. This poor fella was outside the night of the spill.
Mo, the cat, now has to take regular steroid shots to help with the health problems he now has from his damaged lungs.
It went to Missoula, and they had big controversies about it. So then they moved it underneath the Scott Street Bridge. They moved it down the track, and they encased it with boxcars around it. And my sister's mother-in-law lives, I'd say about 30 feet from the track. The woman's tongue swells and splits. They had to sell their home, and they moved to Polson, and she does not even come to Missoula. Yes. It affected people in Missoula. They had us in hotels. I mean, I moved hotel when I found out what was going on. I didn't want to be next to it. That's what I had to leave here for. So they infected people in Missoula, too. People on the north side were as exposed as anybody else was. And look, I mean, it's totally asinine. There's a hospital. I mean, it's like, I guess if you got enough money, you can do anything you want to do, because it shouldn't have been there. I think they exposed a lot more people then. And every time I turn around, I'm getting more data, finding out that they exposed people far, far, far away from us with food products.
Despite the recommendations of toxicologists to remove the contaminated soil from Alberton before allowing evacuees to return, the soil remained in boxcars there until weeks after evacuees returned. It then moved on to these other locations.
There's no way you can prove any of this or anything, but it's just,
really obvious to you that the mental clarity, the sharpness, the concentration, it's just not there. I'll sit in school and kids that I have every day, all day long, sometimes have trouble remembering names. People say, oh, you're getting older and all that, but the difference is just really, really noticeable.
I would imagine virtually everyone you've talked to has heightened chemical sensitivity. I think almost everyone I have. I even have some, and I was much less affected than he was, but I notice a lot more chemical sensitivity. He certainly has a lot more, but everybody.
Also, a number of these patients were referred to me by MRL and others because of the fact that I had already had an interest in treating patients with chemical sensitivities. Many of these patients came to me with symptoms very similar to those who have chronic fatigue. The major types of complaints which these patients exhibited or told me about were severe headaches, problems with their eyes being very, very badly irritated, causing pain and difficulty with vision.
Eye disease is real prevalent among people. I've been diagnosed with amoebomyitis and blepharitis, and basically it's an age-related disease that the doctor says most people don't get till they get in their 60s or 70s. But because of the chemicals we've been exposed to, he's seeing them in people now of all ages.
These people, unfortunately, did not improve like you would if you maybe just had a brief encounter with some smoke or some other environmental problem. Their symptoms persisted, and it particularly involved the lungs as well. These patients had significant problems with difficulty breathing and cough and feeling short of breath.
My lungs, which it's been so long now that I believe that my lungs are contributed from my heart, irregular heartbeat.
As soon as we went into the emergency room, we were told that we all had reactive airways disease, and we followed through on our doctors. Dr. Lemire for lung, which was with the reactive airways. We've seen an ear, nose, and throat doctor for the sinus cavities and our throat and our ears. There was burns there for myself and my sinus area down through the nasal passage. For my husband, he had burns so bad that he lost his voice for 2 months. Our children, they had burns. We have 3 children. They had burns on their sinuses, into their nasal passages, etc., down the back of their throat too.
Our health before the spill, I would say, was exceptional. We very, very seldom, once a year maybe, went to the doctor. Never anything more serious than a scrape or a broken arm or maybe a cold. Since the spill, I've had chronic headaches on a daily basis, migraine headaches on a fairly often. My middle son's teeth are rotting out of his head. We're all having knee and joint problems, although Nancy has the worst problems. Go ahead, you can jump in anytime you want.
Well, we have been told that Waylon will have to have dentures at this point, and he won't be 19 until June of this year. And Chad has got permanent lung damage. Travis has got permanent sinus problems.
One of the things that upsets me the most now about the whole spill is that what's happened since for me. I used to be one of the largest framing contractors in town, and the summer after the spill, I had I had 5 jobs going at one time, and my business was doing extremely well, and it was that spring after the spill that I just started feeling extremely fatigued and I could hardly climb up on the ladder to show a guy how to nail something. And at the time, I was in absolute denial. I was following, I guess, the MRL line that nothing had happened. There wasn't anything. It was safe to go back and.
He thought I was psychosomatic.
I was telling Katina that, oh, you're crazy. This is all psychosomatic. And I started noticing a lot of the fatigue and the digestive problems and my scalp and sort of confusion. I really, there were times that summer where I would drive around town and lose track of where I was.
Well, Incident Command was really dealing with the emergency. We still had tankers leaking chlorine. We raised, as the health department, the issue of are there other chemicals, and if there are, where are they? So they were dealing with that. They were dealing with all the other security issues and informing folks and so on and so forth. So in terms of long-term consequences, if we had information for people that we thought was solid, we would share it, make it available. We didn't have much of anything about long-term consequences. I think the courts will decide. I mean, I see MRL as the liable party for the spill initially. And what cannot be undone, whatever we, were able to prevent in terms of other potential exposures, what can't be undone is the initial exposure.
What have you done to check up on resident complaints about continuing illness?
Normally what we do is as I said, we try to tell them to go to your physician, go to the public health nurse, have an examination, and then allow that physician or that public health nurse to talk to the public health people that can help them.
I don't think I've had any patients ask for their records, or at least they haven't spoken to me directly about releasing their records to the Department of Environmental Quality. No, I have not advised patients as a matter of course to ask that their records be sent to DEQ.
I've had a number of patients have me release their records to attorneys, but I don't recall patients having their records released to the Montana Environmental Health Department of Environmental Quality. The long-term adverse effects from chlorine are somewhat controversial, and I think there are some pulmonary long-term effects. I would dispute some of the stuff I've read about neurological effects and so forth. Personally, I don't see any literature that confirms that.
How do these symptoms relate to the respiratory system? Multiple wakings of sleep, fatigue, brain fog, pain in legs, short-term memory loss, reading retention, and difficulty with exposures. That has nothing to do with the respiratory system. It has to do with the neurological system. It needs to be explained by psycho-neuro-immunoendocrinology. It takes into effect the immune system. You will see later on down the line, or perhaps this has been done now, I don't know, where you're going to have some of these people having autoimmune problems. Okay? You have psychiatric problems on people who didn't have a psychiatric diagnosis before, let alone decrease in brain function, quote unquote, the brain fog. There's definite, and I've seen this in other than the Alberton spill, there's a definite there's a brain injury that you see in an acute chemical exposure.
He did a neurological study. Dr. Kilburn did a neurological study of the people because his research in 15 years has shown that there are neurological health effects from chlorine exposure.
So I can uniquely draw the conclusion that what Alberton seems to have shown shortly after and a few months after exposure, shortly afterward was, I think, 8 weeks or something. It was June of 1996. Fits the pattern that we now have recognized in several other situations, populations, one in Arkansas, one in Texas, as well as one in Alberton. It damages the brain.
Right.
This will come out and say that that's what it does and what people are suffering from.
Right.
And that's what we've seen now so many other times, that, they haven't been as large a population exposed, but there were 8 people here and 13 in another place and several hundred in Henderson, Nevada, but we only got to examine 7. And when you put it all together, it says, well, there's a new pattern here of damage from chlorine that cannot be anything but embraced as the pattern of what chlorine is doing.
We do not have a specialist in environmental medicine with this point of view of all of the neurotoxicity and psychoneuroimmuno endocrine problems that can happen with a toxic spill. We don't have anybody in Montana like that. We have some environmental doctors that come through occupational health, but they don't necessarily buy into this whole syndrome, which is true for the history of medicine. When somebody's out on the forefront of making discoveries, they're frequently bad-mouthed by the people that are in the middle of the road. And that's my opinion of what's happening right here, is that these fellows, the environmental doctors, are out there paving the way of identifying human response to toxics, and the rest of the middle of the roaders are bad-mouthing them.
If you go into certain places that have different kinds of pesticides or chemicals or something in the store, it'll get to you. And if you go into too many of those places during the day, we'll be talking to each other and lose track of what we're saying.
I don't believe multiple chemical sensitivity is a real entity.
This is my experience, and this again comes from patients and then some reading. I don't think it makes a heck of a lot of difference what chemical you're talking about as far as an acute insult. I've seen patients, many patients who are not in the Alberton spill, who have had an acute exposure to a substance. It could be a pesticide, and there's a great deal of literature out there of people having one exposure to flea powder or whatever, and from then on becoming sensitive to perfumes, any sort of petrochemicals, smoke, to the point where they can't live a normal life. I think that's what happened to some of the people in Alberton. The interesting question is, why didn't it happen to all of us? All of the, not me, because I wasn't there, but why didn't it happen to all of us? So what is the biological terrain in those people that allows them to become so susceptible? There is a Nobel Prize in the future.
One of the big problems that we saw initially after the spill was the fact that patients needed help, needed to have medical care, and needed to have advice. Initially, MRL was sympathetic to the problem, hopefully realizing that they did have some responsibility towards these patients because of the fact that they were involved in the cause of their symptoms. However, as time went by, there seemed to be a greater tendency for MRL to try and back out of responsibility and to try and discredit the patients as being hypochondriacs or others types of situations where they were trying to milk the cow, so to speak, and get as much out of MRL as they could. There were a number of patients that I saw who MRL was attempting to buy off to hope that they would go away and disappear into the woodwork, and they were offering them what I would consider relatively small monetary compensation to shut them up and get them out of the picture. Unfortunately, well, I guess I should say fortunately, the majority of these patients didn't respond as MRL hoped that they would, and did not accept the recommended compensation. And some of these individuals have resorted to lawsuits and other means to try and get a reasonable compensation for their suffering.
And I have health insurance through my teaching job, but if I have 26 years in now, I don't know how much longer I'll be teaching. And the health coverage for a major medical like that is a concern. If it's related to the spill, there could be all kinds of complications on it. So I said, well, it won't cost you a penny if I turn out to not really have any complications, and if I do, I know I'm covered. And that's what my request was. And I said, you're an insurance company, basically, and they don't want anything to do with it. You know, the offer they've made is, what, about $3,000 each, $6,000, something for the both of us, $3,500 or something for the both of us, and each. And I mean, anybody could use that money, but if you have a major health problem, it's not going to make or break you. It's, you know, the concern of down the road having a health problem is much more important to me.
Well, Alberton's got about 354 people at the time of the spill, and ACCH has tried to keep track of the community, because whether they're there or not, they are still our community, and they are still exposed, they're still victims, and they deserve all the same treatment as the people who have stayed. And that is a big point with ACCH, and it's part of our mission, is to make sure that we try to help those who have not been able to help themselves.
There have been assessments of the mixture between the potassium cressolate and the chlorine in the products, and people have made assessments of where those reaction products went. Their assessments from a chemical and an environmental science standpoint indicate that the reaction products didn't migrate far off the site. However, nevertheless, that doesn't mean it didn't happen, and I personally don't rule it out, and I've been spending most of my time here trying to gather information about other chemical issues, because there are people reporting things that normally wouldn't, based on the scientific literature, be associated with chlorine.
The EPA decision on what did or did not migrate from the site was a consensus decision made by scientists using theoretical modeling, as opposed to blood serum samples or fat biopsy samples or site analysis for dioxins.
My son got into it, it was late morning, and it was clear down by the 9 Mile house, which I would say is probably 5 miles from at least more than that from the site probably. It's got to be close to 6 miles from the site. He's probably one of the sickest children there are from this exposure, I think. I don't know of anybody that I've heard of that has had as many health problems as my child, as Conrad. And that's where he was. And he was there for probably 15, 20 minutes.
I came in 3 days after the spill. I was not here. I came in on a livestock rescue. And I can guarantee $250 to $400 a month in medication. The only thing I took before the spill was a vitamin.
My hospital bills are up to $40,000 in doctor bills for him.
So not just the people who were here on the exposure initially.
I can't see any way you can say that the people that were closest to it had the most exposure. It needs to go to people. I think part of it is everybody was affected different. Some people it affected their eyes, some people it affected their lungs, some people it affected their brains. I mean, it affected everybody. Different people with different characteristics, it affects them in different ways. If you're going to do a lung test, you need to do it to the people who are having the problems and the people who are sick now, not people that you did before and just happened to be there, but they're not having any problems. You need to do it to the people who are really having the problems. My son went to UCSD Medical Center this summer, to the Heart and Lung Center down there, and went through 30 hours of testing there to find out what was wrong and why he was dying.
Most of the calls have increased. I bet they have increased, I would say probably 30%. More depression. We've had suicide calls, and it has happened since the spill. The increase has happened since the spill. And people talk about their illnesses, and in the beginning they did not relate their illnesses to what had happened to them. It's like it took months to go by before they started connecting, this happened to me. And we have gotten calls where people have said this has happened to me, and they're ashamed, and it's not their shame to carry.
I think most of us that are in leadership positions regarding disaster are really under the opinion is that it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen, which really heightens the fear. And we don't want to go out and cause a degree of paranoia or panic to the community, but had that chlorine spill happened in the city of Missoula, we just simply would not have been able to deal with it without major resources like the entire National Guard. I mean, how can you, if that would have happened, in the railroad yard up here, we would have had to evacuate most likely everything north of the river and a couple miles east and west of the downtown area. So that would have taken hundreds and hundreds of people to accomplish that. And then you have to provide security to those homes afterwards. So again, it's a recognition that we've done a little bit of planning, but we're certainly not going to be able to do it on our own. Your timing is really pretty unique, as the director of the Missoula County Health Department and I are going to meet with MRL, the Montana Rail Link, this coming Wednesday. And while we've had some meetings with them, we want to just sit down where there's just like 3 or 4 of us and ask some real specific questions. From my perspective, it's not that I don't believe anybody, and so I'm not accusing anybody of falsifying records, but I'm not really confident that we know what's being transported through Missoula and in what quantities that's coming through. So right there, the statement is that we can do a whole bunch of planning, but if we had a better documentation or record of what's coming through, maybe we could be a little bit prepared.
In 1996, Montana Rail Link handled 461,355 carloads on its 832 miles of track through Montana. Of these carloads, 14%, or approximately 35,000, were regulated shipments. Regulated shipments are considered hazardous if released. The top 5 regulated MRL shipments carried in 1996 were gasoline, 6,605 carloads, asphalt, 5,143 carloads, liquid petroleum gas, 2,389 carloads, copper concentrate, 1,829 carloads, diesel fuel, 1,523 carloads. Chlorine was within the top 10 list. Low-level radioactive waste has traveled across MRL tracks in the past 10 years in what they deem infrequent trips. All of these statistics are prior to the changes in the Yellowstone pipeline routing, which is adding fuel to the current transport.
The communications, we had the MRL spill, and then do you remember when the runaway train was? Yeah. Well, that's a pretty good example of 100 or however many cars there were, 50 cars racing backwards to Missoula. And like one thing that bothers me the most is a car can be designated as an empty car. It's been unloaded, but still contain as much as 10% residue. So you've got a 5,000-gallon car of some serious chemical. It could still have 500 gallons of this toxic stuff in it.
I don't keep bleach in my house at all anymore. I never used to think twice about picking up bleach at the store and bringing it home to use with my laundry for my wipes, or even adding it to water for scrubbing. Never thought twice about it till this happened. I can't use it now. I use peroxide instead. I use peroxide for my whites, works great. So don't buy bleach anymore, would be what I would tell anybody. Buy peroxide. People come into Costco, and Costco sells it in a big twin pack, and if you've ever been in there, they're in huge jugs. I want to run up to those people when I see them with, 4 or 5 of those big twin packs on a flatbed and just tell them, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing to yourself? I refrain from doing that because I'll probably lose my job, but I want to tell them. I want to shout it to them so bad. I don't use bleached paper unless it's there at the office, which is what they supply us with. But if I have a choice, I don't use it. Not anymore. I don't support the industry anymore. That industry's harmed me and my family.
When I heard about the Alberton spill last year, I thought it was going to be the beginning of the end of chlorine, because I don't know how many more of these things this country can endure before it realizes how stupid it is for us to continue bleaching paper with chlorine, making plastic with chlorine, pouring chlorine on our soil and calling it pesticides. It makes no sense. I was in Louisiana 2 weeks ago because as part of Greenpeace's campaign to phase out chlorine, we are looking at what is the largest growing user of chlorine, and that is the polyvinyl chloride industry, PVC. PVC plastics can be found in a lot of places in modern life, and none of them necessary. And PVC is now the greatest intake source for chlorine. This is a global industry. These are global corporations that don't give a damn about place, if I can be blunt. They are not tied to a local community. They are not answerable to a local community. They move their materials and their money around the globe at a pace that would make your head spin. The production of the things that they will make with this PVC will take place someplace else. The incineration of the things that they make with this PVC will take place yet somewhere else. And the people will be dying everywhere. The people on this planet who bear the highest body burden of chlorinated compounds, organochlorines, are in the Arctic. They don't make it and they don't use it. The stuff travels around the globe, and for reasons that our brilliant scientists don't yet understand, and I certainly don't either, these persistent organic pollutants migrate to the poles. 1% of the chlorine used on this planet is for drinking water. 1%. And although we firmly believe that there are very safe alternatives to that and that that could be phased out tomorrow as well, we are not taking on the municipal water authorities. We are taking on Stone Container and the other users of chlorine and producers of chlorinated compounds, and in the end producers of dioxin.
I had no idea chlorine was going through my town. I had no idea stuff was going through there from Hanford till this train derailed. Now Hanford deals with a lot of stuff besides radioactive materials, bodily waste, etc. But I think, though, as a resident of Alberton, I have a right to know.
The Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, EPCRA, was passed in 1986 in the wake of a tragic chemical accident at a Union Carbide facility in Bhopal, India. EPCRA established ways to cope with chemical emergencies, including local emergency planning committees. LEPCs seek to involve community members, businesses, and emergency responders in emergency planning and chemical safety decision-making. LEPCs are tasked with preparing comprehensive emergency plans outlining local chemical hazards and emergency response procedures. In 1990, as part of the Clean Air Act amendments, Congress required industrial sites that use extremely hazardous substances to disclose risk management plans, RMPs. RMPs in the EPA's toxic release inventory provide LEPCs with a database of chemical hazard information. Unfortunately, much current information available to LEPCs excludes transportation information, a major gap in current right-to-know regulation. The National Environmental Law Center has reported that up to 25% of chemical accidents fall into this transportation category.
We were in a no-and-win situation, period. And now that we have done that, and we settled
4
for
days later.
a small amount, 4 days after this, and our attorney that was representing us with MRL also represented us with our Social Security. We got letters in the mail saying that yes, we were disabled, and they disabled us from 4/11/96 to the time that we applied.
Disability due to 4/11/96.
And no, even our attorney never told us that once you become on disability, even though you'll have steady income, Nancy's not going to be covered at all. Your children are not going to be covered for medical. Steve's going to have to wait 2 years for medical attention. Anything before that 2 years, you're going to have to pay for in full. Since that time, we have continued to see doctors. Our health problems have stayed the same as they were. They have, for myself, the doctors feel, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 medications is what they've narrowed me down to. Long life term. In the beginning of this thing, we all lived in the same community. And occasionally at the post office or at the town grocery store, at a football game, you could talk to your neighbor and find out, how are you doing, this kind of thing. But when push comes to shove and your finances become a problem and you've gone through all of your resources and you just can't hang in there, you get separated and you lose contact with these people. I hope that everyone will be safe to a point and get the medical attention that they need, and all of their concerns get addressed, as of my family. Maybe it's going to take many years before a lot of our questions are answered. But as of almost 3 years later, the reason that we're doing this interview is because we still have very many concerns. And
facts were misrepresented to us, and we feel that Montana Rail Link needs to take responsible action and do the right thing, and also ensure that this doesn't happen to other communities. It's sad, but what's done is done. We can at least make sure it doesn't happen again.
That's right.
Well, Roger and I had been playing music for about 18 years, and we were getting to the stage of life where it was getting harder to move the band all over the United States. And our children, who were also in the band, were growing up and getting married and going on about their own lives, and we had decided that we needed to put the band in a permanent place.
The first Alberton resident to have a brain imagery scan, or PET scan, which measures brain function, has had abnormal results come back, compatible with encephalopathy associated with toxic exposure. In late 1998, Dennis Washington was ranked by Forbes magazine as one of the richest people in the world, with $4.5 billion.
They didn't know what they were dealing with, but they sure as heck knew where to get the people that did know what we were dealing with. I mean, I'm giving them that doubt now that I've been further into it. I think they knew what they were dealing with from the get-go, and that what they were dealing with was they didn't want to put out the bucks that they knew they were going to have to put out. And let's face it, Denny Washington doesn't have enough money to buy this valley. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to pure economics. This is a business. It's a business world. It's a corporate world. And that's what happened here. We are the liabilities of a corporate disaster. And the part that really scares the heck out of me is nothing has changed on this railroad. And at nighttime, I live on this track. I know what goes on. I've lived on this track all my life. And I'm telling you what, The worst stuff is traveling at night, and these people cook through here. They'll make my whole house shake sometimes. Those trains are traveling. And I don't care what their speed zones say or anything like that. There's something wrong in our system that we can't go and get more control on these railroads. This is what's tearing me apart, is that nobody gives a damn.
Do you remember when you loved me? Before the world took me astray. If you do, then forgive me and make the world go away. Make the world go away and get it off of my shoulders and say the things you used to say and make the world go away. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I'll make it up day by day. Just say you love me like you used to and make the world go away. Make the world go away and get it off of my shoulders and say the things you used to say and make the world go away. All right, Raj.
Do it. The only reason I use chlorine in industry is it's cheap and easy. And it's poisoning all of us.
I'm sorry if I hurt you. I'll make it up day by day. Just say you love me like you used to and make the world go away. Just say the things you used to say and make the world go away.
Everyone runs up the stairs in our school except for me, and I'm the last one in our class almost all the time. And sometimes I'm late for school because I can't ride my bike that fast. And if I do, when I get to school, I'm having breathing problems and stuff. And in the first part, when it hit winter, when the chlorine spill happened, Brian was playing out there, and I wanted to go outside too, but I couldn't because Mom wouldn't let me, and I just stay in for like 15 to 25 days, and I don't know.
For more information on the Alberton Community Coalition for Environmental Health and their railroad safety campaign, contact Lucinda Hodges, Office Administrator, P.O. Box 8733, Missoula, Montana 59802, or call 406-728-7572. For more general information on U.S. toxics issues and resources and community organizing tools, contact Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, 150 South Washington Street, Falls Church, Virginia, or call 703-237-2249. For information on toxics in the oil refinery industry, contact National Oil Refinery Action Network, care of Citizens for a Better Environment, 500 Howard Street, Suite 506, San Francisco, California, 94105, or call 415-243-8373. This program was produced with equipment and facilities provided generously by Missoula Community Access Television. To contact Montana Rail Link, Washington Corporation, and/or Denny Washington and give someone a piece of your mind, call 406-523-1500. Ask for Denny Washington, owner, or Dan Watts of Incident Command.